Oh man, did I just do that unmuted? Let me try this one more time. Thank you, Tezan. Hello and welcome to Gas Tech webinar supported by Energy Connects. I'm Susan Kish. I'm a senior advisor at the Loan Programs Office at the U.S. Department of Energy. I'm happy to host today's webinar. We have over 950 people registered from all over the world, more than twice the number who joined us last year, as we explore the topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how it can impact energy industry value creation. But why are we here and why is this important? According to the IEA, almost 39% of the global labor force is women, but within the traditional energy sector, that's only 16%. Wages for women employees are on average 20% less than their male counterparts by skill level or experience. And women are less likely to remain at companies than men at all ages and all stages of their career. The energy transition is an important opportunity to address some of those gaps, because as we all know from our own business and from our own work, the absence of diversity, homogeneity is in fact in many ways a strategic risk. Diverse teams make better decisions, have longer impact, are more creative. Today's conversation is hosted by ExxonMobil, who developed the LNG Power Play program that's focused on women in LNG and gas, developing networks, creating networks, developing business. It's best known for their Power Play Awards. This is their 5th year. They have a Rising Star Award, a Pioneer, an Ambassador, and those award nominations, just in case you're interested, close just this Friday, June 16th. The award winners will be announced at Gas Tech 2023, which is coming up very soon. It's happening in Singapore the first week in September. The conference program is now live online about their strategic program, technical commercial agendas, hydrogen, climate technology. If you'd like to see more on that program, please visit www.gastechevent.com/conferences. In today's webinar, we have 4 wonderful guests who will share their perspectives on how DEI can create commercial value. In themselves, they are also diverse. We have voices from Houston, from Pemba in Mozambique, from Beijing, and even here up in Boston. And all senior leaders, but these 4 have very different and distinct backgrounds in law, in finance, in strategy and marketing, and in engineering and geology. Those differences in background, those differences in geography, all have a difference in how they'll view this question. Our 4 speakers include Jillian Ivanko. She's the president and CEO of Chart Industries and the winner of the Power Play Rainmaker Award back in 2020. Matthew Chandler, joining us, is president of LNG market development at ExxonMobil. Tatiana Lopez is co-founder of MWE and the CEO of Mozambique Enterprise Development Center, which is part of the Rovuma Basin and sponsored by those partners. And Tatiana won the Power Play Pioneer Award last year. And finally, Tezan Ko, president of China Gas Marketing at ExxonMobil. I look forward very much to our conversation today. Our format is going to be as follows. We're going to ask you, the audience, first a question. It's a statement. We're going to want your opinion on it. We're going to vote on it at the top and at the bottom of the seminar to see how perhaps our discussion might have changed your view. We have 4 topics we're going to dive into. I'm going to be asking a panelist to take the lead on answering, but this is more of a conversation, so hopefully all of us will engage in that dialogue. Across this next hour, we're going to ask you, our audience, to submit your questions and share your thoughts on the Q&A function on On24. We'll do our best to pick up as many of those as we can because we want this really to be a conversation. So before we start, let's open that poll. John, if you can flip that up and opening up the polling component. So the statement is, effective diversity, equity, and inclusion programs positively impact the long-term commercial performance of organizations in the energy sector. And we're going to ask you to what extent you strongly agree, somewhat agree, neither agree nor disagree, somewhat disagree, and strongly disagree. So voting's open. We're going to give you about 30 seconds, and we'll share the results, and we'll return to these at the close. Just take a moment. For those of you just joining, please take a moment and share how you react to the statement that's on the screen. How does DEI programs positively impact the long-term commercial performance of organizations in the energy sector? And I'm going to ask our producer, John Ramsey, to tell me at some point when we can close the vote and share some initial results. John and Michaela, can we see some initial poll results? Fantastic. Strongly agree, 61.3%. Somewhat agree, 32%. Neither agree nor disagree, 5.3%. Disagree somewhat, and strongly disagree, 1.3%. Excellent. That gives us a benchmark, and that also tells us, our audience is one for whom diversity, equity, and inclusion is an important topic and remains an important topic. So again, thank you for joining us. I'd like to start with our first question, which in many ways is really the most important one as we get into this conversation, which is, and if we can have the first slide, please. How does diversity, equity, and inclusion drive improved commercial performance? This is really at the heart of whether this is a nice to have or a have to have. And I'd love to ask Cezanne to share her initial observations, her experience, and start this conversation. Cezanne, what are your thoughts on this one?
Hey, thank you, Susan, and a very good morning, good afternoon, good evening to friends and colleagues and interested parties in DE&I. This is a very important topic. DEI is a strategic imperative, especially during energy transition, to attract the best diverse talent so that we can all come together to create sustainable and innovative solutions to supply the world the energy that a growing population needs while lowering emissions. And this is really an equation, right? Plus, addition is not one or the other, but and. So, Susan, I've been in the commercial world and with ExxonMobil for the last 31 years. And I can tell you many, many examples that I have seen the result of a diverse team versus a non-diverse team. And I like to cite an example recently when we were negotiating. Now, in formation of a negotiation strategy, we all know that having a strategy up front for any commercial negotiation is very critical. Now, with diverse view, diverse talents coming together, it took a while to develop the negotiation strategy because we debate a lot. We think about what are the commercial currencies, what do we really need, what do our customers really need, how do we best come up with the win-win solution. So it took a lot of debate and discussion, but I would tell you those time and debates that we spend on is time well spent because the commercial result is outstanding that I can tell. And I also want to cite, a Deloitte study that I found to demonstrate that, hey, having a diverse team really helped us to have more innovation, more innovative ideas, almost by more than 20%, and it reduced risk. And in today's world, fast-paced, fast-changing, high risk, we need to look at how do we reduce risk. And having diverse view help us to challenge each other, and therefore, hopefully, the desirable result is better innovation, lower risk. And I would say we cannot just focus on diverse. We need to think about how to have an inclusive environment so that we all, our people, our team members who are diverse, feel psychologically safe to raise their ideas. Because when they feel free to raise ideas, is when we can have innovative solution. And study has shown that if we allow this inclusive environment to nurture, to blossom, the chances of us having 8 times better result is out there. Yeah.
That's great. And I think that resonates with probably the experience of everyone on this call, but many in the audience as well, that robust discussion, right? It might be painful, might slow things down a bit, but it does, as you said, provide its time truly well spent. Hey, Jill, I'd love to get your views on this one. Leading chart industries, it seems this is also a priority there. And I wonder if you have seen it translate into commercial performance.
Absolutely. And what Cezanne said really echoes with us as well. And we think of diversity as diversity of thought and perspective, which brings innovation. The energy transition certainly to us is a catalyst for this as well, especially as looking at alternative sources of fuel power, et cetera, requires full solution offerings. And also the technologies that are out there today, in our opinion, are not going to be the technologies that get us to our 2050, 2030, 2060 goals that the public and private sector have. So therefore, fuller solutions require more diverse thought and perspectives, and technologies and innovation, as Cezanne said, also require that as well. So what did we do? Back at the end of 2019, we consolidated our global commercial team to what we call One Chart Global Team. And so that brings together those various perspectives, as Susan started the dialogue today, with various geographic perspective, various skill set backgrounds, and they're now working together as one team versus in silos. Simultaneous with that, in early 2020, we launched our formal DE&I teams and committees, which is an all-volunteer group from our 11,000 team members around the world. And from them, they generated a platform and created the space for this dialogue and this perspective. And what we've seen as a result of that is 2021 year-over-year orders were up 39%, and 2022 over 2021, our orders were up 66% year-over-year. So there's direct evidence that these activities link to true commercial outcomes.
Let me just make sure I get this right. Your growth went from 39% to 66%, your year-on-year growth in those 2 years. And
Correct.
How important do you think was that emphasis on diversity, on inclusion, on pulling these global teams together in determining that? I mean, that's really pretty wild.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive, and I think it's a testament to the team coming together, as bringing themselves together to share that diversity of perspective. I think it also generated access to more customers. Our new customer metrics over the last couple of years, I think we had over 700 new customers in the last 2 years, and I really attribute it to the teams coming together and bringing that not just the diversity of thought, but having the foundation that doing this in a structured manner and a more calculated manner, it brings together this idea of we can be a full solution, a first of a kind team that wouldn't have happened without that collaboration together, that space that was created by formalizing these programs, and also really consciously thinking of making sure that we have the skill sets that are needed.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Tatiana, I know you're in Pemba, in Mozambique. And from what I understand about Mozambique, which is a fascinating country, you've got religious diversity, cultural diversity. There's a lot just there. Plus, it sounds like you have some of the world's largest oil and gas companies who have now come because of the LNG reserves that were discovered, 10 years ago or so. Can you talk about the role of diversity in commercial performance and what you're starting to see there and how important that is or is not so far?
Okay, so basically what we can see now is that companies are extremely concerned with this topic. So we passed from a tick in a box of environmental and social governance standards on diversity and inclusion to go to action. And we at Mozambique, what we try to do is to focus, for example, in providing capacity building to women-owned businesses so that they can have more opportunities to participate in the value chain and to supply goods and services to the oil and gas industry, for example, to turn them to be more competitive. And actually, I can give an example of one of our biggest achievements in our activity. Last year, we were able to certify the first female-owned company in food quality. And that company now, because of that certification, is able to supply some of the companies of the energy sector. So we truly, and I also would like just to highlight what my colleagues have said, like I really believe that diversity and diversity of thought creates innovation and more quality. And Mozambique is a quite diverse country, and we can see that as well in our discussions. And when we have team meetings, we can also give some testimonies of that innovation.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Matthew, just to close on this question around commercial, right? The statistics that Jill shared are pretty darn impressive, but it also sounds like she's got a mature program. Just wondering, in your experience within LNG and Exxon, have you seen a commercial impact or result from an emphasis on DEI programs?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I appreciate the comments by Cezanne and Jillian and Tatiana, and just want to say thanks for the invitation to participate, and Susan for your moderating the panel. Maybe just a couple of thoughts. You know, Cezanne talked about being able to continue to provide affordable, sustainable, and secure energy sources, especially as we move into the transition. You know, finding energy sources, I'm a geologist by background, it's not getting any easier to do. And so we're going to need more innovative solutions and more innovative people to be able to find the sources of energy that are going to be required as demand continues to increase across the world. What I've noticed is when we have groups of people that come together to solve very difficult problems, when we create a space that everyone feels comfortable to provide an opinion or provide their perspective, it puts us in a much better position to be able to anticipate roadblocks for potential business outcomes. And when we can identify what those roadblocks are, what the signposts are to moving through a business process or towards a business decision, it allows us and puts us in a much better position to be able to pivot from a commercial standpoint to really identify and come to a value accretive outcome. It very rarely is that you decide, I'm going to go from point A to Z, and it's going to happen just how you plan out. And so as long as you're able to get that diversity of thought and bring in all those perspectives, you can anticipate maybe how might the world change as we work through this business problem together. And having that diversity of thought and people that have different backgrounds, I think only adds to that and leads to viable commercial scenarios.
So you're saying life isn't always a Gantt chart?
I tell my wife it is, but she tells me it's not. No, it's not,
I
right?
understand.
So,
it's not.
yeah.
And that diversity allows you to figure out those, those wiggles in that Gantt chart as it decides to go off in a certain direction. So that's great. That's a really good point. I'd like us to pivot to our second question, if we could, which is focused on how are methods of measuring and reporting DEI evolving in the energy sector. Now, you have to realize I'm a banker by background, right? I worked for UBS way back in the day, and you can't manage what you don't measure, right? I mean, everybody owns that particular phrase, but specifically in things that are so sometimes really intangible, figuring out simple, clear metrics just feels like a really good way to make sure these things have impact. So Jill, can I start with you on this one? Because it sounds from your sustainability report like you've got some nice simple metrics up there.
Yeah, absolutely. And Susan, you took my opening line to this question. You can't manage what you don't measure. So that's perfect, though. I mean, because I think that really is the lead in. And what I would say here is on balance, I think this is a really interesting topic because there's such a broad spectrum of perspective on what should be measured and how it should be measured and how it should be reported, right? There's a view that everybody should be reporting the same thing and everybody should be measuring the same thing. My perspective is that it's not the metric that drives your business. It's what are you trying to accomplish in your business, and what is your business principle and vision, and then what are the right metrics that get you there. And this is where kind of I think one of the questions I saw in the Q&A was how do you really define the context of DE&I? And I think it does vary based on your company, based on the evolution of the journey of your strategy. And so to us at Chart, it's how do we make our company and our industry better? And that's the linkage we try to have to DE&I. And in turn, then what are the right metrics to measure from there? So the link to your company's purpose is really, really important in determining what those metrics are. And it's also our view that, Matthew and Cezanne and Tatiana's metrics might not be the same as Chart's, but I guarantee you we're all measuring something. So what we look at is, okay, how do we make our company better? And every meeting we have internally, we talk about that. And from there, you get metrics that come out of it. The other part of it is skill sets. We have on our board of directors, 4 of us are female. That came about not because we said we wanted 4 female directors on our board, but rather we said we wanted diversity of thought and perspective and backgrounds. So we looked for skill sets. It so happened to be that those skill sets came with diversity. And so I think you can also kind of turn this the opposite way, is the metric is the measurement of what you're doing, not the driver of your behavior. And that's kind of how I think about the metrics themselves, is you're going to see an output from your actions, but your actions, you want to measure those actions and make sure that they're delivering what you want, but don't make the metric the reason you're doing something. Make sure that it ties to your business purpose. And hopefully that in your business purpose is creating the space for this diversity of thought, because that's our view, is that that's what's going to be most successful in the future for energy companies in particular.
So Jill, one of the questions that's come up from the audience is around expat-oriented countries. So you've got global operations at Chart, right? Where yes. People who are local employees, and Tatiana, this is something we've talked about before, people who are local employees, and Matthew, we also talked about this one, local employees versus the expats from head office, right? How do you ensure that diversity of thought brings in that angle of a local perspective and ensures that local voice has impact? And how do you trade off that versus the global experience of the senior executives who have seen this 6 times before in 6 different places? How do you actually manage that? And how would you measure the effectiveness of the way you're looking at it? And that's a hard question, Jill.
Yeah, would you like me to start with that, Susan?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So, so what we look at is in enablers. How do you enable all of your workforce around the world? And it's something as simple as I'm an English only speaker. Now, I can't assume that everyone around the world, with over 55% of our team outside of native English locations, that is easy or fair to do. So enablers and tools, so that this is translated into local language, that the talent programs that we see as effective in North America, as an example, might not be where the talent programs that are effective elsewhere. And so we have a very diverse set of talent programs that enable every level in the organization to participate in the ability to gain more skills and, if they want, progress. And that's taken a long time to put those in place. But I think that's a real crucial part is don't just assume your home in perspective applies globally, because it absolutely doesn't. So creating the, Matthew's term, creating the space and the ability for people to have access if they desire to do so, I think is a real key enabler. But tools, key enablers. And then I think the other part is, I say all the time, in my role, there's no way I'm going to make 11,000 people happy with every single decision. And so you have to allow for the discussion. And my favorite part of my job is every day I hear from someone in the organization that's not a direct report to me. And I learn something new from every one of those input points. So making sure that you are accessible as an executive can bridge those gaps. And maybe at times it's just perspective. And so those are the types of qualitative things that don't necessarily have a direct, tangible metric associated with them.
Understood. And some really good examples, this thing around translating programs. And I'm sure using tools like DeepL and artificial intelligence makes that just that little bit easier. Matthew, any thoughts on this one, on how do you measure and what kind of metrics you want to track as you look at these programs?
Yeah, maybe just a couple of thoughts, because there were some things that Jill said and that you said, and kind of setting up the question from the audience, Susan, is, the global breadth of our operations, I think, mandates us that we have diversity. It's foundational to what we do in order for us to be successful. For us, we find a tremendous amount of value in providing training, elevating and then hiring employees, especially in the communities where we operate all around the world. And so that they can ultimately become valuable contributors to what we do. We operate in over 60 countries. We have over 160 different nationalities that work with us. And so diversity, equity, and inclusion is really foundational to what we do and the culture that we want to build wherever we're working. And the culture changes, right, depending on where you are across the world. During my last assignment at ExxonMobil, I worked in our Guyana operations. It's one of our most active assets. If people know what's kind of going on in Guyana right now in the global energy space. We have 6 deep water rigs that are actively exploring for and developing resource. We're producing somewhere around 1,000 barrels a day of oil. It's quite possibly the most active operation in our industry. And there, we're focused on developing a globally competitive workforce. We continue to invest strategically with those local communities and projects to support the country's development plans. We have an effort with our partners there to spend over $100 million over a 10-year period to be able to provide training and work with the communities. And we provide employment to more than 5,000 local Guyanese workers. And they help provide a lot of that diversity to our teams, both as individual contributors and then as members of our leadership teams there. So it's similar there. I use that as an example because that's what's familiar to me. I just came from there. But it's similar elsewhere where we operate, where we're deep in development and production and as our level of activity increases.
So Matthew, what would be an example that would be helpful to our broader audience of a metric that you were using to measure the effectiveness of that program to develop a globally effective workforce? What kind of things would you track to know about that?
Yeah, I think it's as we interact with the community, we have an enterprise development center there as well. And Tatiana referred to this in Mozambique, where we interact not just with employees that come to us, that we meet through there, but we also work with businesses. So we track the number of businesses that we interact with that are local Guyanese businesses as well, and the effectiveness of those collaborations, how many are working with us. And then certainly as we see these individuals, as we train them and bring them into our organization, bringing them through career development and kind of seeing how they grow within our organization. They're not just there to fulfill a task and then move on, but to actually grow and develop as individuals.
Very good. Thank you. Tatiana, I know this is a topic top of mind for you in Mozambique. Oh dear, Tatiana, I hope you're still there. I'm waiting for Tatiana. Did she drop from the call? Yeah. All right. While we wait for Tatiana, Jill, I'm just going to ask you for one thing. Supply chain, right? One of the metrics I measured in your sustainability report was you were starting to extend some of your DEI work across your supply chain. Can you talk about how you're measuring that and how do you put those standards in place?
Yes, and it's something that's, I think, important, and there's Tatiana back, so I'll give a short answer here. It's important in our belief is that we can help the ecosystem get there, and that's, again, something that's important to the fiber of our culture. So we actually use a tool called risk methods where we gather information and we're able to assess our suppliers there. And the other part of it is some of this happens naturally where we have inbounds from diverse suppliers and they talk to us about that, and we're willing to give them a shot, especially because the principle in our business is we have more than one supplier for all of our inputs. And so there's opportunity to allow people to have the chance to get involved in the ecosystem by having that as the principle of the business. So lots of great things happening there. But Tatiana, I'll hand it back to Susan so you have the chance to answer the last question.
Tatiana, if you can follow up on this topic we were talking about with Jill and Matthew about local.
Yes, I would love to, because I think my contribution is go a little bit to the roots. And Matthew also talked about communities, and Jill as well. So here we have a literacy problem, for example, right? Our communities, they don't even have the basic levels of literacy. So how can we engage properly with them? We have a couple of examples, but I would say if we could merge corporate social responsibility with local content and bring a more holistic social and economic development concern, I think that would probably address better how we look into development. And I'm just talking about my reality, Mozambique. I will give you an example of things that we are doing to, for example, to reach communities. We have to work in local languages because our country is extremely diverse and we have different languages across the country. In northern Mozambique, we have a different language from two different languages from the ones we speak in Maputo, for example, besides the Portuguese, which is the official national language. And some of the ideas that we have developed is to design the training programs with videos to be more attractive on the way we do the capacity building and in local languages. Just to give examples of tools that Jill mentioned that companies can create. I think that I would also like to make a reflection on measuring and reporting on diversity, because this is one of the questions that we have been debating internally, and it's a little bit linked to the question of quotas, if we should use quotas to force
and what's your thought?
Not only employment of national citizens, but also of women. And I don't have a particular idea linked to this as a clear answer, but just to share that also this is part of the debate in terms of including this diversity or measuring this diversity, if we should have a specific number, a mandatory number of nationals employed or of women employed in certain levels, in certain departments. And I think I will leave this as also as a reflection.
Thank you. I mean, it's a really good question. It can lead to unintended consequences. But if you don't have targets and you don't have aspirations, I wonder how you get there. Suzanne, I'd love to ask you to close this one. What kind of metrics have you found most effective, right? In an engineering culture, which is true for most of this industry, I would think that metrics and targets would be extremely important. So are there any particular ones that you've found effective over the years?
Yeah, and I agree with a lot of the comments that were made earlier on, whether it's by Matthew, Gillian, or Tatiana. I don't think there's a silver bullet. I don't think there's a single number that we can measure. And last year, we published in ExxonMobil, we published a report of 18 pages talking about investing in our people. And inside there, you would see there are a lot of different numbers that we quote. But I believe that the most important point is every individual need to have a tailor-made individual development plan. And we all as leader, as supervisor, really need to get to know our people well, and then think about how to develop them, and then really help them to reach their full potential. So for us, I think Matthew mentioned earlier on, diversity in a way, sometimes we take it for granted because we are a global company with lots of diverse talents, and is our competitive advantage. People is our asset and is our competitive advantage. I think then it's up to us as leaders, how do we create an inclusive, psychologically safe and nurturing environment where everyone feels respected, wherever you are, culturally respected. It doesn't matter where you are. You know, I'm a Singaporean, worked in ExxonMobil for 31 years, and I've been moved in multiple countries, and the company has provided so much training to make sure that I assimilate, and at the same time, I give back to the country that I'm in. So, for example, I'm in China right now. How do I develop the Chinese talent, not just to be successful in China, but beyond China?
Excellent. Thank you. Let's move on to the next question, which focuses on steps, tangible steps that organizations can take to create a more inclusive corporate culture, which really builds on Cezanne's question, which value diversity, create equity, and deliver on inclusion. And Matthew, I'm going to ask you to start on this one, because your story of what your management team was when you arrived and when you left in Guyana was a fabulous catalyst, and figuring out how you did that and what else you saw effective would be really interesting, I think.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Susan, and happy to talk about that story. I want to maybe share a little bit of a personal thing of why DEI is important to me, and then probably why that translates a little bit into this story, Susan, as well, as I was reflecting on it. When I was 19, I had a really cool opportunity to live in Oakland, California, and doing service work among Laotian refugees from the Vietnam War. Because the Bay Area of California is a melting pot of many cultures, when I was doing that work, I spent a lot of time among different groups of people that spoke a lot of different languages, from Mandarin to Lao to Thai to Tongan to Samoan to Tagalog and Cebuano and beyond that. And I was lucky enough to learn a little bit of Lao myself. Don't test me on it if anyone speaks Lao, because you'll challenge me. I ate a lot of their food, which was really good. But I learned the power of diversity and the impact it can have on a work and social environment from people that have a lot of different viewpoints. So when I think of this question, I think of that experience. DEI will lead to more robust conversations and decisions that benefit from a wide range of thoughts. I talked about this a little bit earlier, but we have to create space for it to occur. We need to actively make sure that we have leaders that understand that being a leader isn't an indication that the person is the smartest person in the room, but that the best leaders are those that can bring people together that have a diverse background and help them work towards a common purpose. I'm convinced that when you have a diversity of background in your teams, whether leadership or working level, the organization will make better decisions. Oftentimes, I think we think about diversity, Jill talked a little bit about this, race and gender identity, language, culture, and it is all of those things, but it's also about the background, the education, and the experiences. So the example that I shared with Susan previously that I'll share now is when I first became the exploration manager for the countries of Guyana and Suriname here at ExxonMobil. That was my previous assignment. I managed 5 supervisors in a group of about 70 people. When I got into the role, I started meeting with each of those 70 people in small groups and one-on-one, just to get to know the team better and know kind of where things were. And I noticed 2 things that were a bit concerning to me. One was I realized and was provided feedback that people didn't feel comfortable sharing their opinions in meetings, and this was very concerning. The second was I noticed in the first week of being in the role that our leadership team was not diverse on a number of fronts. It was noticeable to team members, and we all had very similar educations. We were all about the same age. We all had very similar career experiences and all very similar backgrounds. And what I knew, what we had in front of us, is we had some very important exploration decisions in both of those countries. And I knew that in order to get to the right technical and business decisions, we would need diversity of thought. So it wasn't that those leaders that were on the team lacked leadership skills. It's just we didn't have a lot of diversity among our leadership team. And it just kind of happened that way as the organization grew. So what did we do? We expanded and we further diversified the leadership team. I had people move on to new assignments and brought some new leadership in to bring diversity of thought and background in. I also started inviting to our leadership team 3 individuals that were not in formal leadership roles, but worked with our team and had different career and educational backgrounds than the entire leadership team, including those that were coming new into the leadership team. Also, as a leadership team, we met regularly with members of the broader team to discuss ways to really make people feel more comfortable in sharing their views. And we established team building events to get to know each other better so that we would come to recognize what each person brought to the team. And I noticed that people started to provide feedback. People would start stopping by my office and give me feedback on upcoming decisions. We had people that were outside of our team that noticed the change in diversity on our team and asking, well, what did you do? And it was like, well, we just made the change that we needed to create the diversity that we needed. And I'll say that, for me, in that role, we worked through some of the most complex exploration issues that I had worked during my career. And I don't think we would have gotten there if we hadn't had that diverse set of leaders that had different experiences that could bring what they had, both from a life and from a business standpoint, into the role. It was a blast as a leader. It was just a really good time.
That's an impactful story. But I wanted to ask, one of the things that, and this also came up in the Q&A, is defining these terms, right? Defining diversity. You and I talked about this one, Matthew. Defining equity, defining inclusion. It sort of feels like art is in the eye of the beholder. But given the diversity of experience you show from 19 years old, talking with the Laotians to Guyana and dealing with the different perspectives there, how would you what's crisp, right? I'm looking for crisp. What's a crisp definition of those 3 terms?
I would say people that have diverse education experiences, right? So in the geoscience realm, I work with a bunch of geoscientists. We all kind of tend to think alike. We like rocks.
Rocks are fun.
People they are fun. Different education, different job experiences. So they all haven't had the same specific job experience. And then something in their life that has been different, right? Whether they've grown up in a different culture or experienced something different that just makes them think about the world differently. And that could be related to business, but even about life, what we experience in our life, we bring our whole selves to work, right? And so when you do that and you bring that to a discussion that can impact value, I think it just lends to identifying things that maybe someone that's like you, if you were all alike, you wouldn't identify things that you otherwise would if you had someone that had kind of diversity in those 3 areas.
Good. Matthew, is that your short, crisp definition of all 3 terms?
Yes.
Okay, good. Jill, how would you define this? And actually, you know what? Define, if you can make that short, because I do want to ask you some detailed question about steps organizations can take, because it's clear there are different levels of maturity of companies around DEI. And I'm betting that the more mature your program is, the better results you're going to get from it. But Jill, what's a short, crisp definition of DEI?
Creating the space, getting to know people, and using your experience for good.
Oh, that's nice. I like that. Okay, use experience for good. Now, steps. What's something pragmatic that this audience can walk out of this room and go, I can do that?
Yeah, okay. So I personally, I don't think actually that anybody out there, or it's very, very rare, is against the idea of diversity and inclusion. I just think that their own biases sometimes come into a situation, and then how do we pragmatically try to address that, create space, knowing people, and doing good? And so I'll give a couple of actual examples. Before I do that, let me just tell a quick story. When I first became CEO of Chart, I went to an investor, so public company investor things. Usually they bring people to you for a day, and it's like speed dating for investors. And this was my very first one, and this sitting at a table with multiple tables, and a gentleman came up and he asked me to get him a coffee, and I said, well, the coffee's back in the back, right? I didn't really even know what he was getting at. He assumed that I was there to bring him to serve beverages and meals and so on. And then he came, and he happened to be my next shareholder meeting. And so he comes back to the table with his coffee, and he says, "Oh, I'm so sorry," like, because I introduced myself, and he said, "I am so sorry. I shouldn't have assumed that," right? And the best part is he ended up buying shares, and I think he's still a shareholder today. And I think it was a guilt buy, I'll tell you that, right? But my point in telling the story, right, is he didn't have any malintent. It was just his bias. And so
every woman on this call has had a similar story, whether you're in the audience or whether on the panel. So please.
So how do I take that experience and do something good with it? I share that story, and I do so in a way that I say, I don't think he meant anything bad by it, and I laugh about it, because then I'm sharing an experience, and that gets other people to share something similar. Like you said, I bet everybody on this call has something like that. So that dialogue, and Matthew said it in his first answer, creating the space to have that dialogue. But practically, like, here's a couple things we do. Every day, 7 days a week, I send a daily spotlight out to our global team. And it's the result of our team members nominating each other to talk about something they did well. It could be giving back to the community. It could be something they did commercially. It could be a Kaizen event. It ranges. I've been doing it since May 2nd, 2020, and I've never been short of a nomination. What it does too is it lets people get to know each other, because they reach out to each other then and they say congratulations, and it's become a thing. So that's a generation of a practical thing that is good. And then we also, on the other end of the spectrum, like one of the things you have to do is think of how do you incentivize people to get involved. We do contests, we do innovation contests, we do a week of understanding every year, where there's topics and there's raffles and there's cookbooks and lots of ways to have people give their backgrounds into the company. And then we also give an extra day of paid time off every year to every one of our employees to go and volunteer at a charity of their choice. So things like that are tactical, and they don't necessarily on their own, maybe they don't do anything, but as a whole, the people get to know each other. They have the opportunity to share and do good.
One specific question, unconscious bias training programs. It came up in one of the Q&A questions. Have you found those effective?
We do them. And it's interesting because our number one piece of feedback was, why don't we call this conscious bias training? And because people generally do have a bias that they would tell you about. But we found it effective, and it's also been something that we require every year.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Cezanne, what are 2 or 3 ideas that the audience can listen to and go, oh, I can do that?
Yeah, and I think Matt and Gillian have shared about what the corporation can do. And I'm going to bring and say that every one of us can do something about it, right? So, first of all, I'll say a shout out, especially those in senior position, and many of them are men and probably in this call. Please help to advocate for your female colleagues. Identify visible roles or opportunities to allow them to shine, right? So that's the first thing that we can all do. Secondly, for everyone in our industry, let's think about how to collaborate with others who are totally different from us, especially the minority, and recognize them for their efforts and achievement. And lastly, I think everybody talked about it already. If you see a bias, especially unconscious one, please call it out. Now, I want to share an example. About 18 years ago, I had my first expatriate assignment from Singapore to the United States, right? And my first review with the president. And I had lots of help, all my supervisor, manager, everybody are trying to help me, were trying to help me to prepare me for this president review so that I can excel. And then, I was, wow, okay, really work hard on the presentation, what to say, what not to say. And then after the presentation, I felt really good because I felt that I've done a fantastic job. And one of the really well-intentioned sponsor and mentor of mine came by and said, Zisan, great job, but you shouldn't have worn that Chinese jacket of yours. And I'm like, wow. And her point of view is that my president should look at me and view me as an international resource. And if I wear my Mandarin jacket, it could view me just as a Singapore or a Chinese resource. But the fact is that I'm a Chinese. It cannot be changed. And I wish at that point in time, I will actually tell her about this unconscious bias. And I would say, 18 years later, and hopefully a little older, a little wiser, I would say, call it out in a very respectful manner about this type of unconscious bias. Yeah.
You need a fair amount of confidence to do that to your boss, right? You need that safe space, as Matthew talked about it. It's not easy to do that, but that's a great anecdote. We are getting short on time, but Tatiana, I'd love you to talk, if you can, about our final question, but if you can also talk about power play and how that worked, and why these kind of schemes are actually impactful, right? It's been going on 5 years. Does it make a difference?
Well, I would say that in Mozambique, it made a huge difference. And why? When Power Play was launched and Tracy was in Mozambique at the time for a conference, a group of girls and ladies working in energy sector, we were doing some things. Basically, we were trying to enlighten the work that some of us were doing in the energy sector. But what I could say is that Power Play really made us to go from informal to formal. So we formalized a network, which today is called Mozambique Women of Energy, and made us act. So we continue to be a group of voluntaries, but what we do, we organize ourselves in 4 pillars: think, build, connect, and lead. And we are not only mentoring some young girls, helping some of our girls to be leaders, and we have quite a few examples. We have one of our first co-founders of MWE, Talumba, that she was also nominated for a Power Play Award. She has been hired now by one of the big energy companies to be the talent recruiter in Paris. So we are doing the other way. So we Mozambicans are going to be expats in Europe. And we have another Power Play Award being given to another of our girls, Jocelyn. She won the Rising Star. And we have the first National Director of Energy. She's also part of MWE. She was appointed 2 weeks ago. But we are also not only interfering or participating in the drafting and approvals of important legal regulatory instruments, mainly in the field of energy transition, as we are also implementing some capacity building programs. I mentioned in the beginning to train women-owned businesses. We at Mozup, our management is also, the majority of our management are women. So we try to balance half women, half men. And but we are also trying to build small projects in rural areas and in remote rural areas based in solar panels. We called Girafa Solar, solar giraffe, where we train women to provide some electricity to remote communities. And so I would say that these type of initiatives, they have a huge, in Mozambique, they have been having a huge impact. And I can see also the other energy companies, they are following and trying to show what they are doing in terms of diversity and inclusion. And if I just may also reinstate the importance of diversity, And now I'm going just to give you my personal experience in my household. We have our young boy. He has some developing problems, so he's different. And my husband is a musician. So I really think that the way they support me in everything that I do, for example, the video that we are going to launch tomorrow for our inauguration has been made by my husband. And what I try also to bring home in terms of the impact that we need to have in our country, it's also brought by these experiences from other programs, other leaders like the ones that we have today in the call, that can inspire us to be better persons and to really have an impact in the world.
That's a lovely way to close. Tatiana, thank you. Okay, lightning round. All right, and then we're going to close because I just know they're going to turn this off in like 3 minutes here. Lightning round. One word. Why is DEI important to you? Cezanne, can you start? One word.
So hard, but I'll go for 2 words, please. Positive impact.
Positive impact. Good. Matthew.
2 words, collective voice.
Collective voice. Jill.
Future.
Future. And Tatiana.
She did 1 word.
Generations, future generations.
Future generations. Excellent. Listen, it's really been a pleasure. I really have appreciated your time, and it's been a great conversation. But now I'm going to turn it back to the audience and ask them a polling question and just see, did anybody change their mind on that statement? Does effective diversity, equity, and inclusion programs positively impact the long-term commercial performance of organizations in the energy sector? So take a moment and think about this again. We've had the joy of some really different perspectives here. We've had themes around commercial impact, around safe space, around the effectiveness of metrics, some and some not. And we've talked about diversity from different angles: gender, race, country of origin, experience, education. And we've had some very powerful anecdotes of how it's affected both people on this session in a personal basis and also within their leadership roles today. So if you can just take a moment, I'm sure they're going to close this in a second. So while we keep this up, I'll just make some closing remarks. I did this. GasTech, September, Singapore. Please do come and join and see many of the folks who are on this session and in this panel. And if you want more information, that website, www.gastechevent.com/conference. I'm sure you were able to write that one down quickly, but that's the place to go to get information about those programs. Please note you're going to get an email with instructions on how to access a recording, because this has been recorded today and will be available, hopefully without my embarrassing, I forgot to turn off my mic at the top, hopefully it went right into the conversation. And please do feel free to share this. It's been a great conversation. I've really appreciated everyone's time, and I really appreciate the comments and the questions, thoughtful ones from our audience. John, can you share the poll results and let's see how we ended up? Oh my gosh, that's fabulous. So we started off strongly agree was at 61%. It has shot up to 90%. Agree somewhat has gone from 3.2 to 7.8. Neither has dropped from 5 to 0, and nobody's in strongly disagree. So well done, everyone. Well done, audience. Thank you so much for your time. Have a fantastic day.
Hey, thank you,
Bye.
Susan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much. It was lovely. Bye-bye.